The morning sun filtered weakly through the narrow barred windows of the barracks, casting long shadows on the worn wooden floor and the thin cots lined in uneven rows. Every creak of the floorboard seemed amplified in the quiet of early awakening. The German women stirred slowly, rubbing eyes and stretching stiff limbs accustomed to the harsh routines of captivity, yet sensing something unfamiliar in the air. The usual aroma of damp clothing and hard bread was replaced by a faint scent of soap and fresh linens, a whisper of something clean and unfamiliar that made their senses alert and wary. The ordinary expectation of harshness had shifted, and every small detail became a source of curiosity and subtle tension. As the guards unlocked the doors, a crisp breeze carried the scent further into the hall, and the women exchanged cautious glances, unsure whether this was a trick, a test, or a real change in their environment. The steps outside echoed on the stone path, and the faint sounds of running water reached their ears, creating a strange mixture of anticipation and disbelief. Each woman calculated carefully the possibility that the day ahead might bring unexpected experiences and challenges as their feet touched the cold stone floor. They felt the texture of something different, the ordinary roughness replaced by a sensation almost gentle and unfamiliar. The world outside the barracks seemed altered somehow, promising yet tinged with uncertainty. In the courtyard, rows of shower stalls gleamed under the morning light. The scent of soap, strong and clean, filled the air. The women hesitated at the threshold, some stepping forward cautiously, others lingering in the shadows, observing reactions of fellow prisoners and guards alike. Every glance and movement carried meaning, signaling compliance, curiosity, or subtle defiance. The ordinary act of washing had been a distant memory, a dream almost forgotten. Yet here it presented itself in stark, almost surreal contrast to months of hardship, deprivation, and filth. The mind struggled to process the simplicity and abundance of what they now faced. One woman tentatively picked up a bar of soap, feeling the smooth surface in her palm. The scent, strong and fragrant, an unfamiliar sensation of warmth and comfort, slowly spreading through her body. She glanced at the other women, their expressions ranging from disbelief to fascination, and the air seemed charged with silent questions about trust, obedience, and the rules that governed this new, unexpected order. The ordinary ritual of bathing had become extraordinary, an arena of psychological and emotional tension, where every movement and choice was observed, calculated, and measured for consequence. As they stepped into the showers, water cascaded over their bodies, warm and steady, the sensation alien and almost luxurious. The women instinctively flinched at first, but then allowed themselves a tentative release of tension there, muscles relaxing under the force and temperature. The simple, ordinary act of cleansing their bodies became a moment of almost shocking self-awareness, a recognition of their own humanity, long suppressed by captivity and deprivation. Yet each moment was underscored by subtle caution. The possibility that indulgence could be punished hung invisibly in the air. Every splash, every movement measured against unseen scrutiny. The guards observed silently, noting reactions, gestures, and subtle signs of emotion without intervention. The women felt their eyes, yet knew that they were not being judged in the harsh punitive sense familiar from past experiences, but rather studied carefully for understanding, perception, and adaptation. The ordinary environment had been transformed into a laboratory of human response, observation, and adjustment. Each gesture and glance cataloged in the minds of both observer and observed, every act of washing and drying imbued with layers of psychological significance. And anticipation towels, freshly laundered and warm, were handed out one by one, each woman taking it cautiously, feeling the soft texture on her skin. The contrast between the harsh, coarse blankets of the barracks and the smooth, absorbent cloth triggered a mixture of relief, disbelief, and subtle guilt. The ordinary tactile experience now layered with meaning. The women shared fleeting glances, each silently acknowledging the shared shock and quiet wonder. The air hummed with tension and unspoken questions. About the sudden abundance and care for their comfort and dignity, the ordinary act of drying oneself had become a subtle challenge to prior assumptions about captivity and human kindness. Breakfast followed with simple yet nourishing food plates. Filled with bread-buttered jam and hot tea, the women approached cautiously, taking in the colors, aromas, and textures that had been absent for months. The ordinary act of eating became an exercise in restraint, observation, and silent negotiation. Each bite measured carefully, noting the reactions of fellow prisoners and guards alike. The ordinary became extraordinary, each taste carrying with it a sense of abundance. Unfamiliar and almost overwhelming, the body and mind adjusted slowly to the new environment, every sensation amplified by deprivation and months of scarcity. In the following hours, the women were allowed to move through the camp courtyard, noticing gardens, freshly tended flowers planted in neat rows, the sun glinting off metal. Fences and paths swept clean of debris. Every detail noted with astonishment and subtle suspicion. The ordinary acts of maintenance and care took on a significance that reached beyond cleanliness, a message implicit in the care taken by others, a signal of attention, observation, and perhaps unexpected concern. The POWs cataloged every nuance, the way the wind moved leaves, the light reflected on water surfaces, the distant hum of activity, each ordinary moment layered with subtle psychological complexity. During the day, small groups of women explored further, noticing infirmaries stocked with medicine shelves, organized supplies, and laundry areas filled with fresh clothing. The ordinary infrastructure of care had been transformed into an almost miraculous display of order and attention to detail. The contrast between previous deprivation and current abundance sparked whispered conversations, curiosity and cautious speculation about intent and consequence. The ordinary spaces of camp life had become arenas of trust, observation, and subtle negotiation. Every movement a potential signal, every glance a potential message. Some women lingered near the library or educational areas, noticing books, neatly arranged shelves labeled, carefully posters on walls, and maps of distant lands. The ordinary act of learning had been made accessible and inviting, a sharp contrast to prior restriction and suppression. The mind felt both liberation and uncertainty every step taken among. The books carried an echo of possibility and the latent fear that such freedom might be withdrawn without warning. The ordinary act of browsing knowledge had become an extraordinary exercise in courage, curiosity, and self-restraint. Evening fell. With a muted glow on the horizon, the women gathered in small groups, reflecting on the day. The ordinary routines of washing, eating, and movement transformed into a tapestry of shock adaptation and subtle social negotiation, every detail catalogued, every sensation noted, and every new habit examined in the mind for its rules, expectations, and potential consequences. The ordinary twilight seemed heavy with memory, anticipation, and the quiet hum of shared experience. The women understood that the ordinary comforts had become extraordinary challenges to their assumptions, survival strategies, and psychological endurance. Night descended with its familiar quiet, punctuated by distant calls of guards and the faint rustle of leaves. The women lay on cots with clean sheets, blankets warm and dry, the simple comfort of bed almost overwhelming in its ordinariness, yet layered with uncertainty. The ordinary act of sleep was now accompanied by a heightened awareness of observation adaptation, and the new subtle rules governing interaction and trust. Each woman catalogued every sensation, every reflection, every memory. The ordinary night had become a space of psychological recalibration, anticipation, and subtle preparation for the challenges that might come with the extraordinary comforts and care offered during the day. The morning air carried a crispness that felt almost alien to the women POWs as they emerged from the barracks. Each step measured, cautious, and deliberate. The clean floors, the neat pathways, and the gentle hum of activity created a strange dissonance. Against the months of harsh deprivation, the ordinary act of stepping outside became a sensory test. Every sound and movement amplified, every glance from guards or fellow prisoners scrutinized with precision and curiosity, every small detail catalogued, for meaning anticipation and the possibility of hidden motives. In the courtyard, the line of showers awaited once again. The women hesitated briefly before approaching the warm, flowing water. The ordinary act of washing had transformed overnight into a complex ritual of observation and self-awareness, each movement catalogued by themselves and each other, every flinch, hesitation, or sigh interpreted silently, and compared mental notes made about adaptation trust and the subtle dynamics of power and control. The once mundane act of cleansing became a layered exercise in self-preservation, psychological adjustment, and careful study of human behavior. The soap, fragrant and unfamiliar, filled their hands as they lathered cautiously. The sensation of smooth skin and warm water triggered a cascade of astonishment and disbelief. The ordinary act of cleaning became almost disorienting in its richness. The women glanced at each other, seeking confirmation that they were not imagining the abundance and care that surrounded them. Their eyes met in fleeting moments of shared wonder and silent questions about the intent behind such unexpected kindness. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation, caution, and the subtle tension of newfound possibility. After the showers, towels warm, soft, and freshly laundered were handed out one by one, each woman holding it, tentatively feeling the texture on her skin. The ordinary act of drying became a moment of psychological recalibration, a confrontation with the contrast between the harshness of captivity and the current unexpected comfort. The women noted every gesture, every expression, cataloging reactions of others, the air thick with curiosity, unspoken speculation, and anticipation. The ordinary act of self-care transformed into a delicate negotiation of trust, adaptation, and perception. Breakfast followed with the aroma of freshly baked bread, butter, and hot tea filling the air. The women moved carefully, observing the arrangement of food, the care taken in preparation and presentation. The ordinary act of eating became a study in observation and restraint. Each bite measured, noting reactions of guards and fellow prisoners alike, every gesture catalogued and every subtle exchange interpreted. The ordinary meal elevated to a complex tableau of social observation, expectation, and subtle psychological maneuvering. The women understood instinctively that even ordinary comfort carried with it extraordinary consequences for behavior perception. And trust. After the meal, a guard announced a work detail to organize laundry and store supplies. The women moved cautiously, noting the arrangement of shelves and bins, the ordinary tasks of folding clothing, sorting linen, and managing simple materials. Now laden with observation and interpretation, every movement catalogued, every glance interpreted for intent and understanding. The ordinary act of labor became a study in human behavior, negotiation, adaptation, and subtle testing of boundaries. Each action calculated for safety, reputation, and potential approval or disapproval. The environment ordinary in function, yet extraordinary in consequence. In the garden, small clusters of women gathered, noticing flowers planted with care, vegetables tended. Methodically, the ordinary act of observing nature became almost meditative, yet layered with the awareness that every detail might carry meaning, every gesture be noted by others. The combination of care, order, and attention, a sharp contrast to the neglect and scarcity of prior months. The ordinary landscape had become a field of psychological and social engagement. Every observation, a test, and every interaction, a subtle negotiation of trust and adaptation. During the afternoon, some women were directed to the library areas, the shelves filled with neatly arranged books, maps, and educational material. The ordinary act of reading transformed into an extraordinary experience of wonder and curiosity. The women moved slowly through the aisles, touching spines with careful fingers, noting titles, images, and maps. Each ordinary gesture layered with anticipation, uncertainty, and subtle calculation. The ordinary activity became a mental exercise in exploration, observation, and subtle negotiation. With both peers and authority figures, the mind absorbed the abundance while the body remained alert to potential consequence. Outside in the courtyard, the women were allowed to perform light exercises, the ordinary act of movement, stretching, and walking under the supervision of guards became a carefully observed process, every gesture recorded, every alignment checked, every pause and breath interpreted. The women catalogued reactions of peers and authorities alike, each ordinary motion transformed into an opportunity to display adaptation awareness and subtle understanding of the new environment. The act of movement became charged with significance beyond physicality, a test of composure, awareness, and strategic observation. Evening descended. With a muted glow, the women gathered in small clusters, reflecting on the extraordinary abundance of the day. The ordinary acts of washing, eating, moving, and observing transformed into a tapestry of shock, reflection, and subtle social negotiation. Each moment catalogued mentally for adaptation, insight, and strategy. The ordinary twilight charged with unspoken tension, anticipation, and quiet analysis. The women understood that the extraordinary environment demanded constant attention, awareness, and subtle psychological engagement, every ordinary act reframed as extraordinary in consequence and meaning. In their cots, the soft sheets, blankets warm and dry, the women lay awake, cataloging sensations, reflections, and observations. The ordinary act of rest became a period of reflection and subtle recalibration, each sensation and memory layered with anticipation, the air filled with quiet questions about intent, trust, adaptation, and subtle negotiation of their environment. The ordinary night transformed into a complex psychological exercise, observation, cataloging, and mental preparation for the days ahead. Throughout the night, whispers of curiosity carried through the barracks, soft murmurs of astonishment and reflection on the unexpected abundance of hygiene care and comfort. The ordinary acts of sleeping, listening, and observing transformed into extraordinary acts of psychological endurance, awareness, and subtle negotiation. Every small sound catalogued every movement, noted every shift in emotion observed. The women understood instinctively that the ordinary environment now demanded extraordinary awareness, constant adaptation, and careful evaluation of human behavior and intent. Morning arrived pale and cool. The women emerged from their cots cautiously, anticipating another day of unexpected abundance. The ordinary rituals of washing, eating, and moving now layered with anticipation, curiosity, and subtle psychological tension, each gesture carefully observed. Each movement cautiously executed. The ordinary world transformed into a landscape of observation, trust testing, and adaptation. Every act carrying weight, every glance signaling potential understanding or challenge, every moment a study in human behavior negotiation, and the delicate balance of expectation and adaptation. The line for showers moved slowly, the women cataloging every detail, noting temperature flow of water, reactions of peers, and subtle gestures of authority. Each ordinary act of bathing layered with extraordinary observation, anticipation, and strategic awareness. The soap lathered over skin felt unfamiliar, yet almost indulgent. Each movement catalogued for adaptation and subtle understanding. The ordinary act of self-care became a complex psychological landscape, testing awareness, patience, and trust. Every glance a potential signal, every sound a subtle message. Afterward, towels warm, soft, and fragrant. Again handed out, the women noted the contrast between the coarse blankets of past deprivation and the current abundance. Every gesture catalogued every reaction, noted every shared glance interpreted in the context of trust observation and subtle negotiation. The ordinary act of drying oneself became layered with social and psychological significance, each moment carrying weight beyond its physical function. The women catalogued each sensation, each expression, each subtle reaction to prepare for navigation of the environment. Meals followed with abundance again, nourishing bread, butter, jam, and hot tea. Every bite measured, noting subtle changes in reactions, gestures, and glances. Every ordinary act of eating transformed into observation, reflection, and strategic adaptation. Each ordinary moment layered with anticipation, subtle tension, and the necessity of awareness. The women learned quickly that even ordinary comfort could carry extraordinary psychological consequence, requiring observation and careful response. The dawn crept slowly across the camp, casting muted light on the barracks. As the women stirred from sleep, the ordinary sensation of warmth under clean sheets filled them with cautious disbelief. Each movement felt almost surreal. The months of deprivation had dulled their senses, and now every ordinary comfort became layered with uncertainty and anticipation. The sound of footsteps on stone, the soft rustle of blankets, the distant call of guards, all carried heightened significance as, though the air itself contained hidden messages, every glance toward a fellow prisoner measured for reaction, observation, and subtle understanding. In the courtyard, the showers waited, gleaming under the pale morning sun. The women approached cautiously, their senses alert. The ordinary act of washing transformed into an intricate ballet of psychological awareness. Every drop of water felt amplified. Every gesture cataloged the lathering of soap, fragrant and smooth-triggered waves of astonishment, and tentative pleasure that mingled with deep-seated caution. Each woman studied the reactions of peers and guards alike, noting subtle shifts in posture, expression, and tone. Every ordinary movement laden with extraordinary consequence and subtle negotiation of trust. As the water flowed, the women experienced a complex mix of sensations: the warmth against their skin, the unfamiliar softness of soap, the sensation of clean fabric absorbing moisture. Each detail recorded in their minds, cataloged. For meaning, anticipation, and survival, each ordinary act of washing became a delicate dance between indulgence and caution, awareness and adaptation. The air hummed with silent calculation, every flinch, hesitation, or sigh interpreted for subtle intent. Every glance exchanged a potential signal in the complex web of observation and human behavior. Afterward, towels, warm, soft, and fragrant, were handed out, each woman holding it tentatively, feeling the smooth texture across her skin. The ordinary act of drying became almost ceremonial, layered with the weight of months of deprivation and the surreal abundance of the present. The women exchanged fleeting glances, communicating astonishment, disbelief, and cautious understanding. The ordinary environment had transformed into a psychological arena where every gesture carried meaning and every sensation required careful mental processing and reflection. Breakfast followed with the aroma of freshly baked bread, butter, and hot tea filling the air. Women approached cautiously, taking measured bites, observing reactions of peers and subtle cues from guards. Each ordinary mouthful became a study in observation, adaptation, and strategic response. The abundance of nourishment, both physical and psychological, created waves of astonishment and curiosity. Every gesture cataloged, every expression interpreted, every pause noted. The ordinary act of eating had become an extraordinary exercise in awareness and subtle negotiation of perception, trust, and adaptation. Throughout the morning, small groups explored the camp courtyard, noticing gardens, flowers, and neatly tended plants. The ordinary act of observing nature became an extraordinary study in human behavior, observation, and adaptation. Each detail cataloged, every reaction of others noted, and compared. The simple beauty of growing plants and orderly spaces contrasted sharply with memories of scarcity and neglect, creating layers of astonishment, reflection, and psychological engagement. The ordinary environment, now a rich landscape of observation, calculation, and subtle negotiation. Some women moved toward the library and educational areas, shelves stocked with books, maps, and educational materials. the ordinary act of browsing and reading transformed into an extraordinary exploration of possibility, observation, and subtle negotiation of peer dynamics. Each gesture cataloged each glance, interpreted each pause, analyzed. The ordinary spaces became arenas of intellectual and social adjustment, where curiosity mingled with caution and every movement carried weight beyond its immediate physical context. As midday approached, the women gathered in small groups for work, details folding laundry, sorting supplies. The ordinary acts of labor were observed carefully by peers and guards alike, every motion cataloged, every glance, noted every gesture, interpreted for intent and trust adaptation. The physical activity layered with psychological challenge, awareness, and subtle negotiation. Every ordinary act became a microcosm of the environment's extraordinary demands, and the women adjusted their behavior carefully to navigate the complex terrain of observation, expectation, and subtle social dynamics. In the afternoon, the women were allowed outside to perform light exercises, stretching, walking, or tending small gardens. Each movement observed by themselves, peers and guards alike, every gesture analyzed and cataloged for meaning. The ordinary act of physical activity became charged with significance, every breath, every motion layered with anticipation, reflection, and cautious adaptation. The environment transformed ordinary actions into extraordinary tests of awareness, psychological resilience, and subtle social negotiation. Every glance exchanged, every small sound noted and interpreted. Later in the day, a few women approached the infirmary, noticing the organized shelves stocked with medicine supplies and clean linens. The ordinary act of observation became a careful study of structure, care, and subtle hierarchy, every gesture analyzed for intent and subtle cues of approval or warning. The abundance of provision astonished the women, their minds cataloging every detail, comparing it to deprivation memories. Each ordinary act of observation became layered with psychological tension, reflection, and subtle strategic analysis. Evening fell over the camp. The women returned to the barracks, each step measured, cautious, and deliberate. The ordinary journey back, layered with anticipation, reflection, and subtle negotiation of peer and guard dynamics. Every glance cataloged every subtle gesture, noted the environment, ordinary yet extraordinary in consequence, every sensation amplified by months of deprivation. Each ordinary movement a microcosm of adaptation, observation, and psychological endurance. Dinner followed, simple yet nourishing: bread, vegetables, and tea. Each bite measured for observation and reaction. The ordinary act of eating continued to carry extraordinary weight. Every gesture observed, every glance cataloged. The women shared silent communication, astonishment, disbelief, and cautious understanding. The psychological impact of abundance layered with curiosity and subtle social maneuvering. Each ordinary action a test of adaptation and awareness in the extraordinary circumstances of care, provision, and observation. As night descended, the women returned to their cots, clean sheets, warm blankets. The ordinary comfort layered with reflection, anticipation, and subtle psychological calculation. Each sensation noted, every movement cataloged. Each glance remembered the extraordinary environment, transformed ordinary rest into a complex interplay of observation, reflection, adaptation, and subtle negotiation of trust, perception, and social dynamics. The ordinary night carried extraordinary consequences for understanding, resilience, and mental preparation. Throughout the night, whispers moved through the barracks, soft reflections of astonishment, disbelief, and analysis of the day's events. The ordinary acts of sleeping, listening, and observing became extraordinary exercises in mental endurance, awareness, and subtle social calculation. Every sound noted, every movement interpreted, every sensation cataloged. The women understood instinctively that the ordinary environment required extraordinary awareness, constant adaptation, and careful interpretation of every gesture, glance, and word. The next morning, the routine repeated, yet each day layered new understanding, curiosity, and psychological complexity. The ordinary acts of bathing, eating, exercising, observing, and resting became subtle exercises in endurance, awareness, and adaptation. Each gesture cataloged each movement, noted each glance analyzed for intent, meaning, and trust. The women moved cautiously through the camp, aware of the extraordinary, demands placed upon ordinary actions and the subtle consequences for perception, social standing, and psychological equilibrium. By midday, small discussions arose among the women about the unexpected abundance, the care provided, and the psychological impact of comfort and cleanliness. Each conversation measured, cautious, each word layered with unspoken questions about intent, trust, adaptation, and consequence. Every ordinary dialogue, a negotiation of perception, understanding, and subtle social maneuvering, the environment, ordinary in function, yet extraordinary. In consequence, every interaction a test and every observation a study in resilience, awareness, and subtle navigation as. The afternoon waned, the women continued to explore and observe the camp, noticing subtle details of care, organization, and abundance. Every ordinary act cataloged for meaning and context. Every glance noted, every movement interpreted as potential signals of trust, control, or intent. The psychological landscape transformed ordinary behavior into extraordinary acts of adaptation, observation, and negotiation. Every moment a microcosm of the complex environment and the demands of awareness, reflection, and subtle social strategy. Evening brought another shared meal, followed by the return to cots, the ordinary acts of eating and resting layered with psychological processing, reflection, cataloging, and subtle negotiation. Every sensation amplified by months of deprivation and the surreal abundance of care and comfort. The ordinary night became a period of recalibration, anticipation, and subtle mental preparation for the extraordinary circumstances surrounding them.